1. So for reference, I have low iron plus vitamin D deficiency. And side effects from both mean I'm always fatigued. Now what happened to me was in the semi-start of puberty. You know, when you've been through it for like a year, but you still don't have a clue what the fuck is happening to your body. That, so, yeah. Now we start our story. I was quite a bright kid when it came to math, because my brain always worked well with logic shit, I guess. I was, for the most part of my school life, top sets in my band, which is actually quite good looking back. But then the minor health problems kick in, both physical and mental, and my mother starts to get worried when I come home from school and sleep from 5 p.m. to 8 a.m. every night. A few blood tests and doctor's visits later, and BAM! We receive the conclusion, so we inform the school. And they agree that it can be added as medical and I can't be penalized for it. Again, great. Except for one teacher. My math teacher. I had never failed her class, but I always had minimal work in my books, and most of that was half-drunkenly scribbled on the page. This is when she starts to dislike me. She would always pick on me to answer questions, and if I fell asleep in her class, she would slam a textbook on my desk and then belittle me for falling asleep, and send me out into the corridor for being defiant. To be honest, she should have seen that something was definitely wrong when, most of the time, she would find me asleep in the corridor, but oh well. This ended in multiple detentions each week, which I never went to. So one day she sends me out, but this time I stay awake. She is ranting on and on about how me falling asleep is being defiant, and how I would amount to nothing more in my life if I didn't learn how to take orders. She was the only teacher I ever had problems with. And if I didn't pass maths, I passed all my math tests with flying colors, and that's all we were really ranked on. I told her that I can't control what's happening to me. And if she was a better teacher, she would see that something is definitely wrong with my health. And if her lessons weren't so boring, then maybe I could stay awake. And then she said the most beautiful line in the world. "If you have a problem with my teaching, then take it up with the head." I simply smiled and said okay. When the day ended, I called my mother and I told her what had happened. She scheduled an emergency meeting with my head teacher regarding my health and education. I also requested to have all my math lessons in the library. Already not looking good for the bitch. So the meeting rolls around, and this teacher is looking very smug with her little notes, and my mother has fire in her eyes. We get into this meeting and she immediately goes in saying I am disrespectful and defiant of her classroom rules, and that I purposely ignore her and pretend to sleep. She says other things, but I'm already not listening. And then it's our time to speak. My mother says, "So you say my daughter is disrespectful to you, but you have been the only one to ever approach me and say that. Not only that, but you have been the only teacher to say that about my child also." "Well, I don't believe that would be possible. She shows very defiant behavior in class. Even when I send her out, she would sleep outside the classroom."
Wait a minute, so you're telling me that she would sleep outside your classroom door on an uncomfortable and cold floor, and you never thought to once call her mother about it, or maybe tell someone higher than you to help her?
She was only doing it to laugh in my face about the rules.
Actually, she did it because of her medical reason that we were sent in an email months ago. You either decided to ignore what was said or not read the email.
Well, I didn't receive this email, but I will take this into consideration next time I teach her. My mother says, "Actually, no, you won't. I've had my daughter come home and cry to me saying she doesn't want to come to this school anymore, and that she feels like she's less than every time she walks through the door. She was fine about the school until she started your class, so this is me formally asking that she's moved to a different class entirely."
Well, P, is this true?
Well, normally when I get sent out, she would come and find me on the floor, and she would shout at me and tell me that it would be nothing in life when I grow up. Enter the waterworks. The worst part is that some of the kids in that class would bully me because they could hear everything that she would say, and then make fun of me for it. Harder waterworks. Teacher, scared head teacher, furious mother, Victoria's Hotel, Travago. The head assured me that I would be moving to a different class, but until then, I would still study in the library. I said it was fine, and then I finally had peace. My mother said she wanted an investigation launched into this teacher. Did I mention that I dropped a few other incidents with other pupils? because what she was doing could have very bad long-term effects on a child's mental health. They apparently actually did. She got demoted, kind of. She was still head of maths, but she wasn't allowed to teach students. Basically, all she did was grade things and act like an IV. Then Holy Grail fell into my lap a year after. She was highly advised to take early retirement as to not shame herself and the school because of her behavior. But after all this time, I thank her. Because if she had never told me to take it up with the head, I would never have thought about it. 2. I work in a call center, which supports a major UK internet service provider. We'll call it ISP for Internet Service Provider. It is one of the companies which rent the British Telecom phone lines in order to supply their customers with landline phones and broadband connection, aka internet connection through the phone line, supplying 20th century speeds for 21st century demands. I won't go into all the technicalities, but for most of our customers we still provide the old ADSL broadband. We used to have a number of systems which allowed us to troubleshoot the lines and get all the information we needed, such as line management, LMA, Internet Session Manager, ISM, wireless tool, Wi-Fi, fiber cable link, FCL, service problem manager, SPM, etc. All those programs use different abbreviations, but I use these for security purposes. We used these systems on a daily basis until September 2017, when the company launched a new experimental AI to run diagnostics. It integrates only the necessary for basic troubleshooting information from the upper-mentioned systems, and it focuses on time management and fast solutions, and provides us with a ready solution. We call the AI HAL. HAL is a step in the right direction, but it is not a real person and far dumber than its grandson, the 9000 version, so it often gives us stupid solutions for simple problems. Runs a broadband test for a landline issue. For no dial tone, it asks to replace the router, gives resolved on a line with 30+ connection drops in 12 hours, and a landline more crackly than a Geiger counter at Chernobyl, etc., etc. As if the creators purposely entered a sarcasm code into its brain, but I digress. For the less experienced of my colleagues, an override is provided by their line manager, and they do whatever the manager says. But I've been there for years, and I know the side systems well enough to explore all the nuts and bolts, and actually locate the problem, even if Hal told me something was right. Thus, I used Hal for the first 2 minutes of my conversations, and then I relied on LMA, ISM, and FCL, for they always give me more information. I often got chewed by managers for spending too much time on individual cases, but I always got great reviews by the customers, so the managers often neglected that. That was until ISP started shutting down most of the side systems, using the excuse that they were to be integrated into HAL. We kept most of the major ones like LMA and ISM, which were our bread and butter when it comes to stability and speed, until recently when ISP stopped LMA as well. No longer could we troubleshoot the ADSL broadband because we had to rely on HAL, which showed us no line retrains, no errors, no chances to stabilize the lines, no checks for outages. Basically, it took away all microscopes from a bacteria research lab. All of us agents were angry. The more experienced were really pissed. But we got told from management, "You don't get paid to think. Use HAL, it's perfect!" Time had passed. We now had only half of the original site systems, and HAL barely improved. It was more difficult to troubleshoot problems, and customers became less and less satisfied. No longer was I able to resolve 30% of the issues on the phone. We had to book engineers. This wasted time and money. I spoke to my manager multiple times. He said, "Submit your ideas via email, we'll look over them and report back." I submitted a very long email, showing my concerns about HAL, stating that HAL was incompetent, and we needed alternatives. Give ideas, even long-term solutions, which would also cut down the engineers we send and save ISP a hefty amount of money per year. But as you know, nobody likes a smartass. When leadership in the corporate world sees a good idea, they often shut it down, mostly out of envy and fear that their position might be taken away by a person from the bottom of the food chain, only because this person has a little ingenuity. Shortly after my idea submission, I entered a room with 2 of my line managers and an operations manager, stating that I took too much liberty in pointing fingers and that I need to know my place in the company. I then asked the following questions. Well, what if HAL stops working? What are we going to do then? HAL is perfect. It is designed to work even when other systems don't. You don't need to worry. If it goes down, it will get back up in a few hours. Trust in HAL. HAL knows best. Nobody pays you to think about these things. Well, are we here to blindly follow a flawed system, or are we here to provide a good customer service? I'm here for the customer, and I help them in any way I can, because they don't care about our systems. They need a solution ASAP. You're wasting too much time on individual cases. You don't follow the process. It is made this way because it works. If you don't like it, look for another job. Well, guess what happened a few months ago? HAL stopped working due to unknown cause. HAL no longer ran landline nor broadband diagnostics. It always came out with errors, everywhere, on everyone. And even better, we had knowledge of a major outage in one of the more populated areas of the UK, affecting tens of thousands of customers. The side systems that would allow us to see if there was an outage were gone in favor of HAL. HAL was not working. Everyone went crazy. Cue the malicious compliance. Realizing HAL was not working, I responded every time with, "We have technical difficulties. We were told it would take a few hours. Please call us later." Then again, and again, and again. No troubleshooting, no checks. The same sentence over and over again. A BS excuse, then another and another. The customer protested, but I couldn't care less because, when I had before suggested to use alternatives, it had always backfired with the same responses. Trust in HAL, in HAL we trust. HAL is our Lord and Savior. So I acted accordingly. The only successful calls were the transfers to the other departments. I didn't do a single case of troubleshooting for 3 days, because HAL didn't work for 4. 3 of which I was at work. I was actually smiling, for the call duration was only a few minutes, and I took a bunch of them, which lowered my average call time, and I was looking good, statistically. That was until the manager started listening to the calls. They do it to assess us. So yours truly was put once again in the same room with the 2 line managers and the operations manager. What are you doing? What do you mean? When HAL was not working, you didn't do anything. No troubleshooting, no line checks, no manager approaches. You dodged every call that came to you. Well, HAL was not working. What was I supposed to do? Use the side systems, check your alternatives. Use your brain for once. I tried using my brain. I tried helping the customer in any way I could. I went above and beyond before, and what for? To get yelled at for thinking and acting like a human being, and not a mindless tech support. For my work, I got yelled at and reminded where I am in the food chain. You told me in this very room to follow procedure, to do what HAL tells me. HAL was not working, therefore I couldn't work. You told me to trust HAL. It gave me an error and no solution. If HAL gave me no solution as per process, I had no solution for the customer. You are exaggerating the truth. You are again overly dramatic about it. I am not. I am here to do my job, and my job is to provide good customer service regardless of which systems I use. It's not working this way. Yes, it is. My math teacher told me that a single problem has a single solution, and 100 paths to reach it. Here it is, the same case. I take different approaches, but the end result is the same. The issue is resolved, and the customer is happy. Can we agree on that? The managers reluctantly agreed. They never bothered me again on what systems I used. Still, more and more the site systems got shut down, forcing me to rely only on HAL. I am now in the process of quitting my job, because I am tired of dealing with a flawed system and spineless managers who follow their bosses like sheep. I tried applying for a manager's position myself, but I got rejected every time, stating I was too rebellious, and I never followed the right procedure. Therefore, I was setting a bad example. So I decided to go back to my studies and graduate to become a merchant mariner, and travel the world while these bosses broil in their pettiness. 3. I grew up in a small community on an island off the coast of a thriving metropolitan area. It had its ups and downs, but was generally a pretty quiet sort of life. The community had a fairly large immigrant population from various European countries. And one of those was, well, let's call him John. John the Builder. He and his numerous brothers had all moved to the island together and started a construction company. John was a big, affable man, easygoing and always smiling. He spoke excellent English but with a thick accent. Sometimes people assumed his accent meant his grasp of business was lacking, but usually not for long. Within a decade or so of moving there, John and his brothers were pretty much the only builders of note on the island, and anything bigger than a garden shed would go through them. Around that time, my granddad retired and moved to the island with my grandma. He contracted John to help him build his retirement house, and they bonded over their mutual appreciation of a really good concrete mix and pour. By then, John's family were good friends of ours too, so John and my granddad kept in touch regularly, and would often get into involved discussions of building methods and the like. Some years later, the old couple running the main petrol station in town decided to sell up and retire, and the place was bought by Big Fuel Co. Big Fuel Co. decided the quaint old station and garage was in dire need of a complete makeover and modernization, and drew up plans accordingly. After putting the work out for tender, they grudgingly accepted that with the cost of relocating a labor force from the mainland to the island for the work, John's construction firm was by far the most cost-effective. They weren't happy about it, though, and made it clear that they thought John and his brothers were a bunch of rural cowboys who couldn't be trusted to nail two planks together. Still, the contracts were signed and the blueprints delivered to John. As well as the usual amenities, the new station was to have a high, artistically stylish roof over the fuel pumps, held up by two support pillars, you know the sort of thing. John read the plans, thought about the stiff sea breezes the location was subject to, and frowned. He took the blueprints around to my granddad and discussed them. Possibly not entirely within the bounds of the contract, but John was concerned. The next day, John rang Big Fuel Co.'s contact and said in his thick accent, "This roof isn't going to stand up. The support pillar footings are too shallow, and the roof itself is too large for pillars of that size. Plus you haven't factored in the strength of the winds we get here. Everything else is fine, but you need to redesign that roof." "Rubbish," scoffed the Big Fuel Co. guy. "We had it designed by a very exclusive architect, and our engineer signed off on it. It's fine. You don't know what you're talking about." "Maybe," said John, "but I've been building here for 20 years, and I think you should go over the design again." "Don't be ridiculous. You're just trying to get the contract extended. We don't need to check the design, now get the building." Click. John, being the genuinely nice bloke, thought that maybe this was just one person being difficult, and also felt that this sort of thing should probably be in writing, sat down and wrote a clear letter expressing his concerns about the fuel pump shelter, and sent it overnight to the Big Fuel Co. office on the mainland. The next day he got a call from the Big Fuel Co. office, from someone further up the ranks. "What the hell is this? Who do you think you are, trying to tell our architects and engineers they don't know what they're doing? You're only the builder. What the hell do you know? Just build the damn thing." "Could you put that in writing, please?" asked John. This is the point at which a sensible manager would be given pause. When the contractor specifically asks for it in writing, you should probably ask why. "Fine," snarls the Big Fuel Co. guy, and faxes through a terse note that he read the letter and considered it mistaken, and to get on with the construction. John shrugged, carefully filed the note, and went ahead with the build. A little over a month later, the new station was finished, roof and all. On a pleasant, gusty day, perfect for sailing, the Big Fuel Co. bigwigs flew over to see the result. Standing there with John and a curious crowd of locals, they watched as the shiny new stylish roof danced and swayed in the wind, in a manner decidedly unlikely to reassure anyone thinking of refueling their car underneath it. "What the fuck is this?" inquired the Big Fuel Co. boss. Just what I tried to warn you about, replied John. Bullshit. You fucked up the construction and now you're trying to pin it on us. We're not paying for this. You're going to need to tear it down at your expense and build it right. It's built exactly to your blueprints. If you want it rebuilt, you'll have to pay for it, preferably with a new design. Not a chance. This is on you. And if you try to dodge responsibility for it, we'll sue. Sounds good, said John. See you in court. So the fuel station was cordoned off, and legal proceedings went ahead. I don't know much about them, but at some point I do know something like this happened. Defense, you may call your first expert witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. We call Professor Thorne's granddad, internationally recognized civil engineer, who chaired the report into the bridge collapse and was head of engineering at, Floopy Doop University for 25 years.
Big Fuel Co.'s legal team lets out a collective,
Thank you for joining us, Professor. Would you please tell the court how you first learned of the project in question?
Of course. John first approached me with his concerns directly after receiving the blueprints. I agreed with his assessment, and I have since drawn up a brief report on the problems of the roof design. The details and supporting calculations are in pages 4 through 16, but if you don't mind, I'll just read from the summary. I noted the following problems.
At this point, Big Fuel Co.'s legal team was thinking something along the lines of, "Oh shit." What with that and the note John had, it didn't take long to be settled. Big Fuel Co. was on the hook for all of it, plus legal fees. They had to pay John to tear down the unstable roof and build a new one, designed by a different architect and checked by off-site engineers. Nonetheless, when John got the new plans, he rang Big Fuel Co. and said,
"Hope you don't mind, I'm just going to run these past the professor before we get started."
The office I used to work at was located right next to a grocery store. This place was a popular lunch destination for people that worked in this building because it had a lot of quick options for lunch. Also worth mentioning, I worked with a great team. We got along great, would have no problem backing each other up, helping each other out with difficult issues, bringing stuff up for the team, doing favors, and so on. Because I was usually one of the first ones in, I was typically the first to take my lunch, unless I got stuck on a major shitshow of an issue. So typically, before I left, I would ask my nearby colleagues, "Hey, I'm heading next door to the store. Do you need me to grab anything for you?" Periodically, one or two of my colleagues would ask me to grab something when I asked, and would give me some cash or their card to buy what they requested. We all had a great working relationship, and they knew I wasn't going to do anything untoward with their card or cash. It was no trouble for me because I was going anyway, and I usually came right back with my lunch and ate in the break room or at my desk. One of my colleagues, let's call him Daniel, had a usual request: bananas. This request was usually honored without incident. During one such lunch trip, I headed over to the produce department to the usual large display of bananas they have, but this time, I spotted something on the top shelf of the display that I had never noticed before. Or the store had just started stocking. Red bananas. I never knew that red bananas were a thing, so I had no advanced knowledge of what these looked like inside or tasted like. All I saw were these maroon-colored bananas. I saw a sign for the red bananas, but I didn't see a price. I got an idea. I grabbed a bunch of conventional yellow bananas from my colleague and broke off one of the red bananas from the bunch I saw, not knowing how much they cost. I thought it would be a bad idea to buy a whole bunch, especially with someone else's money. I paid for the yellow bananas with the cash that Daniel gave me. I used my card to buy the red banana and ate my lunch. But I stuck the red banana in the bag with Daniel's lunch of yellow bananas. It turned out to be a good idea that I only bought one red banana because they rang up at $1.50 a pound, and the yellow ones were probably 30 cents a pound. So after getting back to the office, I put the bag of bananas on Daniel's desk along with his change. He thanked me and I headed back to my desk. I sent an IM to a couple of my other colleagues. I bought and stashed a red banana in Daniel's bag. Let's see how long it takes for him to notice. About an hour later, I heard an exclamation from Daniel's desk.
What the hell?
He held up the odd-colored banana. I told him while laughing.
It's a red banana!
It was pretty quiet work-wise, so our small team all converged around this red banana in amazement and amusement. I did let Daniel know that I paid for it myself because it turned out to be far more expensive than the normal ones. Someone asked the important question. How do we know if it's ripe? None of us had an immediate answer. A Google search told us that they're a dark maroon when they're ripe. So we thought it was okay. Daniel was not up for taste testing this variation of his favorite fruit. Another colleague, let's call him Andrew, decided to give it a go. He tried to peel it and couldn't break the skin with his fingers. He used a plastic knife to nick the skin and tried again to peel it. The layers of skin separated with the inner half of the skin still on the banana. We saw that the inside skin was a mix of white, green, and the maroon from the outside of the banana. The green didn't bode well, but there was no stopping after committing to this expedition. Andrew worked at this banana persistently for a few minutes, and finally managed to get 1.5 inches of the white fruit exposed. It looked like any normal banana. After all that work to get a little bit of fruit out from under the skin and completely undeterred by the previous struggle, Andrew took a bite. There was a very loud crunch followed by a surprised groan from Andrew. We all cracked up laughing. Never have I heard a banana crunch like that, not even with dried banana chips. It sounded like he bit into a large, hard candy. It was a wonder that Andrew didn't crack a tooth on it. Suffice it to say, definitely not ripe. So there you have it. That's how a request for bananas turned into a hilarious break from office monotony. I did troll Daniel a few more times with requests for bananas, but this was probably the best one. Thanks for listening. 5. Okay, to give some backstory to this, when I was younger I used to work as a starter and ranger for a golf course. The starter job is making sure people's tee times were kept, and the flow of people was on steady. The ranger was making sure people are playing swiftly and also enforcing course rules. I sit in a shack near the clubhouse until I get a complaint most of the time. So I get some complaints on our blue course that there are some people drinking and generally being loud and obnoxious during the course of play. So I get in the ranger's golf cart and I eventually come upon these guys. I happen to notice 3 things. 1, they are just leaving their empty beer cans on the ground. 2, these guys opted for golf carts for their playthrough. And 3, they had a cooler on the course. 2 course rule violations and 1 state rule violation. So I come to this group and it has 3 people in it. I ask them kindly, would you please refrain from drinking on the golf course, it's against our rules. One of the people starts laughing at me and takes one of their half-full cans of beer and throws it at me, and they scurry off in their cart. Now for the revenge. They were already on the 7th hole of blue, and I did remember letting one of those guys on with a red to blue 18 rotation. We have 27 holes with 9 holes each, red, blue, gold courses. So I decided to tail back and follow them out to see what cars they were in when they packed their gear up. I do this and get the model, make, and license plate number of the car. Here is your kicker. Across the street from our course is a county sheriff, and I happen to have his home phone number. He happens to play golf here a lot, and he gave me his number in case of issues. Well, this is an issue, and I call him and relay what I saw and tell him the info I got. Thankfully, these asshats went into the clubhouse to eat lunch before leaving, so it gave plenty of time to get the sheriff to wait. So they get done eating, and I decide to go wait near the entrance to watch the fun go down. Lo and behold, the sheriff was there in his driveway, ready to pounce. And here comes our asshats driving out. They go left, which is the exact direction of the sheriff, and boom! Flashing lights, and they thankfully pull over. The dude that threw the can at me was the driver, so I just start watching some more, and the sheriff starts administering the tests he does for sobriety. He fails on 1, and like a dumbass he consents to the blow test. I don't know what he blew, but it was enough that he turned around and arrested, and then he saw me. Me in my golf cart, waving at him with a giant smartass grin on my face. Don't drink and drive, and don't fuck with people who enforce rules on a golf course. Some extra details. This was in the era where cell phones were not a big thing, so 99 to 2004-ish. I worked there in my late teens to early 20s, This course is in the more rural part of my state and is family run and owned. Edit. Okay. I now know the laws on drunk driving and breathalyzers. It is still illegal to drive any motor vehicle under the influence. Also, let me explain a few things. This is what I was told at the time the rules were. I was told it was a state rule not to drink and operate a golf cart. The coolers on alcohol on course was our rule because you had an option of taking a cart or walking the course. Sometimes the cans and glass get left on the course and tend to screw up our maintenance equipment. You know, fairway moors and rough and the like. I know a lot of places do allow this, but ours didn't. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to Revenge is Ice Cream, number 28. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. I think I'm just going to fill the bath with ice and just lay there till morning. Can I edit from an ice bath? I don't know, but I'm willing to try. Okay, with that I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.